I'm here today to introduce our ACS Nano Award lecturer, Professor Jillian Buriak. Each year we choose 3 award lecturers divided along geographic lines: Africa, Europe, Middle East, the Americas, and Asia Pacific. These lectures were to be given at the European Materials Research Society meeting in Strasbourg, which was unfortunately canceled because of the pandemic. We're still looking for a suitable venue to have all our lecturers give their talks, but in the meantime, we wanted to introduce you to them. Our lecturers for this year are Professor Lei Zhang of the Chinese Academy of Sciences and Beihang University, Professor Stefan Mayer of LMU Munich and Imperial College, and today I'll be speaking with Professor Jillian Buriak, who holds the Canada Research Chair in Nanomaterials for Energy and the Alberta Innovates Industry Chair for Solar Energy at the University of Alberta. She's published 27 articles in ACS Nano so far, and we're looking forward to more, including as she writes up her perspective for her award lecture.
Thank you so much.
We're delighted to have you, and delighted to have you as one of our award lecturers. You've been an incredible contributor to ACS Nano from the very beginning. I wanted first for you to tell us about what you're doing in both your laboratory and with chemistry materials.
So I'll start with chemistry materials because that's near and dear to my heart right now. We really adopted the personalized approach, which I learned from you at ACS Nano, which is every author, we try to have very personalized correspondence, as few form letters as possible, to treat them the way we hope we ourselves would be treated. And so every paper gets very careful, detailed attention, personalized attention. And I think that has helped to build more of a materials chemistry community, the way you have built in the nanoscience community with ACS Nano. In terms of our own work, we work on synthesis of materials in general for a variety of applications, and including energy and biomaterials. Basically, we just have a lot of fun.
One of your real drives has been to combine patterning and materials in innovative and creative ways on the one hand, but also targeting particular but broad applications.
So that has been really fun. I mean, that started in the early days when we were using atomic force microscopy to be able to pattern surfaces. And we said, gosh, wouldn't it be great if we could do something more parallel? And when we watched the block copolymer field to blossom, the directed self-assembly field, we said, wow, can we use that to do chemistry, to direct chemistry in a spatially defined way on surfaces? And that turned out to be way more diverse and interesting than I thought it was going to be. I actually thought that was going to be more of a one-off, but that turned out to be something that's now been ongoing over a decade. So you never know. Always follow your nose.
And now, where are you finding inspiration for where you'd like to take your research?
So still find inspiration in the place that's closest to home, which is really our students. And so I think that the thing that has always been important is to enable the students to come in all excited, all motivated, and say, gosh, wouldn't it be great if I could do that? And so we kind of adopted a little bit of the thinking of Uri Anon in Israel, who said, rather than squelching ideas with a, well, maybe not, or a no, you say yes and. And so conversations, students come out and say, well, why do we do this? And instead of saying, oh man, that'll never work, you say yes and. And so allow those conversations to grow and then turn into ideas that actually have viable starting points.
I think that's also applied to the journals. We've really collected everybody's brains together to see how far we could take things and see who had an idea that we could follow. Really, we've taken taken lead from you in being more personal, as you described, but that applies across research, publishing, and in fact, I think the rest of life.
It's true. 20 brains are better than one. And we work better together. I mean, it's when you challenge each other, and as discussions and arguments they're seen as kind of these bad things, but they're not if they encourage people to really express themselves and enable others to understand these new viewpoints. And you say, wow, that's a good idea.
Actually, we had an editorial earlier this year that featured you and those friendly arguments that we have within the
Yeah,
journal.
exactly. Constructive.
How about early in your life? What is it that made you become a scientist?
I thought I was going to be an astronomer. Always thought that. So my parents got me a really crappy refractor telescope. I shouldn't say that because I'm so grateful that they did. I think it came from Sears, and which is now a defunct company, and it allowed us to be able to see, for instance, the rings of Saturn. At that point, I was done. So that was probably around age 6, and then so you realize these little things that your parents do that feed those interests and how important they are. And so, I mean, I have to say I'm forever grateful to that. And then I started drawing the moon and things like this and belonging to the local astronomy club. And yes, I was really nerdy as a teenager, still nerdy, but I thought that I would actually go into physics. And then when I started as an undergrad, I was actually a math major for 2 years. And then it started to get really kind of funky in terms of you go into math and you combine that with philosophy, or you go into math and then you become an insurance adjuster kind of thing, working out actuarial tables. And I said, ooh. So chemistry was much more hands-on. And so I said, wow, I think I'll do the chemistry thing. And so I bailed from math and went into chemistry. But so you never know the route. You just never know. Just encourage that, because that love of science can go in so many different directions, and it will change. It will shift, but just encourage. It's never about I need to go here. It's about just following your nose. Follow your nose.
That's great. Actually, it's not at all surprising how well we get along. I also started with astronomy and then changed over to chemistry, physics, and math.
All three.
Well, just sloughing off parts along the way and then putting them back in later.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what you've done.
Usually in careers, there are kind of plateaus and then moving up to another one and moving up to another one. Can you describe some of the challenges you faced in doing that as you've gotten as far as you have already in science, with obviously much more to come?
Well, I have to bring in my children, I think, because it was those so many moments associated with having children force you to dig down, okay, because it's hard. So I had Miriam when I was still untenured, and I can't stand it when people say, "Oh, to a woman who's expecting, or a couple that's expecting," they say, "Well, you don't know what tired is until afterwards." But that's true. And so it was after she was born that I realized that there were other gears that could be accessed, that being able to dig down and find those other gears is possible, and we all have them. And so it's only when you're really challenged that you realize, holy cow, I have these other gears. And so then child number 2, there's another gear that's found. And then later, when you're tenured and you're settled, and then someone calls you and says, "Hey, I have this idea. I'm running this new journal. Would you like to become an associate editor?" And so I'm, of course, talking about ACS Nano. And so you're thinking, I don't have any more time. I don't have any more bandwidth. And then all of a sudden you say, gosh, this is just too interesting to say no to. I'm definitely going to do it. And then you find yet another gear. So it's funny how you think that you are at capacity, and yet somehow you manage. And I think that's something you only learn when you're kind of thrown into the fire. And so when I think about those plateaus, I think about those challenges, about having to become not only more efficient, but also thinking about how to capture those ideas that you have on the spur of the moment, to be able to record them, to be able to be talking with your students so that they kind of virtually record them, so you never lose them and that they get executed. Whereas before, maybe I was less organized. I'd have these ideas, but then I'd forget them. And so these plateaus kind of also came from the family side of things. So yeah, those extra gears, that extra bandwidth. We all have
I know what
it.
you mean. So it's also, I think, in some ways, it makes you shift your brain away from what you're thinking about all the time. Your children don't care if your proposal was rejected or your paper got declined at a journal. They're ready for your attention and love, and somehow that also, I think, lets us loose a little bit and lets us reconfigure and come back afterwards with a fresh mind that at least I found hard to do before we had children.
Exactly. Completely agree.
Well, over the next 5 or 10 years, what areas of research would you like to move into?
So I've been very interested in solving the energy crisis. I mean, obviously not solving, but contributing to solving that. And renewable energy is, of course, maybe the panacea that we all talk about, but being able to actually capture that energy, being able to finally see that roll-to-roll printing of solar cells, finally being able to see a hydrogen-based economy, clean burning hydrogen, fueling civilization. I think these are the big things.
And you see a particular hole or target that you'd like to address, or keeping an eye out for what's there and then taking on pieces as we go?
So it's getting materials to talk to each other and this is something obviously you know a little bit about, is taking these disparate materials and then putting them together. Physically putting them together doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have good junctions, you're going to have good connections. And so things like commensurate periodicity, incommensurate periodicity of organic materials in organic devices, inorganic organic interfaces, those really still are the source of so many problems. But problems are challenges, and challenges are interesting research directions, and which lead to interesting problems for students. So we shrink ourselves down as little people, and we go and walk around these interfaces and look around and say, okay, how can we get these two materials to talk to each other better? How can we interface them together? So it's all about the interfaces for these actual applications. And so I think that's where we can make a difference.
And how do you challenge your students and postdocs to identify the problems that will matter to them, that where they'll be more motivated and creative in solving them?
So I think a lot of the students come in knowing what drives them personally. And I think that the place where a supervisor can have the most influence on that is by seeing how they can connect these things, saying, okay, these are big problems. These are huge problems. And clearly, if they were easy, they would have been solved. And so how can you make that connection between the research that you can do in your lab with those problems? How can they then connect these together in a way where they see that they are actually making a contribution to that problem, that challenge? And that's actually not that hard to do, but there can be a barrier in terms of the student coming in and saying, well, I can't really make a big contribution. What can I do? I'm just one person. I'm only 22 years old, or, things like this. And they say, no. If you shoot here, you might reach here. If you shoot down, below the table, then, you're not going to get very far. So you encourage them to think about how to make those connections and to really shoot high. Don't limit yourself in your thinking, to really shoot high. So I think that it's just telling them to whatever drives them personally, whatever makes them feel concerned from a social aspect, to direct their research in that way, because science and civilization, they're one and part of the same thing.
For young people who are interested in nanoscience and nanotechnology, how would you advise them to train and to put together their educational programs? So
isn't this just the most interesting question? And oftentimes I get asked, what's the right way to get it into nanoscience and nanotechnology? And you say, holy moly. I mean, this is the beauty of nanoscience, is that you can just, again, follow your nose. Just go. I don't care if it's entomology, you know, if it's botany, if it's physics, if it's math. They all have aspects of nanoscience, because nanoscience is so enabling. It is so enabling, and it has broken down the barriers between these ivory towers, between these silos of science, that the biologists are talking to the physicists, who are talking to the mathematicians, who are talking to the chemists. Nanoscience has just simply broken down those barriers, because we're all talking about materials, and, you know, materials of life, materials, you know, these can be inorganic materials that all have the same length scale. And so suddenly, when you're talking about materials or things that are of the same length scale, at that point we can break down those language barriers, those philosophical barriers, and talk about the same things. And so it doesn't matter how you get into it. It truly doesn't matter, because nano is everywhere. And so, I mean, that sounds corny, but it's absolutely true. And so you can follow your interests into whatever area and then think, well, where is it in this area that there are these features or these properties that are dependent on the nanoscale, and go there. And there you go. It's everywhere.
Thank you so much for having some time together. Missing you in person, and hoping that comes very soon for us. In the meantime, you know, thanks for sharing your wisdom with our readers and with us at the journal. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Paul.